This whole thing got me to thinking, and thank you, Qtron Man, because your positive acknowledgement of my ideas, while not misunderstanding them, not because sometimes people are like, oh, I really agree with this guy's ideas because they misunderstand me. I see that you see, well, no, you're not going in the direction I feel as though you've seen that we agree on a certain way of looking about reasoning, but we think of the fundamentals and stuff differently. Okay, again, that's kind of the functional equivalence. You can replace one set of terms with a whole other set of terms, and all the same functions of that kind of a machine are done. At the surface, the interface can be the same. It serves the same grammatical role in the logic, and yet obviously internally it can be different. Okay, but it's got me thinking. Okay, so I don't know what specifically. I was just thinking on the top of my head this last video, but what is I believe that forget government. We don't need to be governed. We need an infrastructural state, though, something that runs and manages the commons. And we need a national, actually worldwide commons. Because it just follows from being able to go anywhere. You want to be able to go anywhere, right? Free travel, but people own private property, interferes with free travel. So you have to have this network that supports at least the principle of free travel. Even though you really can't go onto people's private property, you can pass around it easily enough that it's reasonable. And that can be 100 miles around the way because there's not a road through, but it has to be, somehow, and ultimately down to tiny little roads to land, and if there's no road, the right to get there to cut one. Okay, things like that. Infrastructural state. But what kinds of things would you be willing to fund? And separate aside is how do you fund government? Now, we have to have government as some way to enforce, um, you know, some ultimate laws so nobody games the system. Um, and yet, you, on your side, you tend to think, well, that doesn't actually take that much. Somehow there's a simple way, like figuring out a simple way that doesn't cost much and just naturally does this. So while we're here in this system where we have taxes and the government spends money and makes laws, maybe the kind of law you and I could agree on are those which create infrastructure that makes it so you don't need policing, right? You know what I mean? It's like when you put up lamps in the park, there's less muggings, because there's light everywhere. Or, you know what I mean? Some infrastructure makes it so you don't need the policing, because that's what you need for your system to work. We need to become a kind of people trained to not need policing. Maybe there's ways to help us not need policing, certain kinds of structure. I think good education. I'm sorry, but a well-educated kid is less likely to be a criminal, and therefore we need less policing. I would say if a well-educated kid becomes a criminal, you really have to wonder about the society. Maybe there weren't the opportunities, in which case you have to create the opportunities. You see, that's how I stretch out into these social programs that I support more than most people that believe in a libertarian type thing. I believe you have the right to not pay taxes. I think the only way that could work is if you have to leave the country. And what if everywhere on the planet there's taxes, where are you going to leave to? I mean, if the market can decide, then that's your tough luck. But I sort of think, in a perfect world, there'd be some place left that paid no taxes. But mostly, in the end, I think that'd be a preserve where you did it just because in principle for the real holdouts to that, because I think mostly a compromise of some sort of taxation is reasonable. Again, the alternative is that you have a, a state that enters the market in commodities, actually for profit enters those markets and competes with other companies, which other companies don't want to do. They're afraid. But again, we're talking about an ideal world. So say that a government did it right and really kept its nose out of regulating the free part of that market. It would just create the baseline product. If it wasn't good, nobody buy it. But anyway, we're in the here and now, and so what kinds of things could we possibly agree on it? And I think there's a lot of ideas in this category of things that we can spend money on in infrastructure, in our social infrastructure, county and state and federal and internationally, that reduce our need for spending money on war and police. And when you're done with that process, I think you would get down to the minimum cost, and you might find that people could just pay it directly, and they don't need a central organization like a government sort of organizing that. Anyway, the subtext is that I think this might be a good opportunity for some productive discussion um, on some of these issues, because I recognize, you seem to recognize, there's a connection here on how we're thinking in a certain respect, and yet we diverge quickly enough that it's very interesting to have both in contrast. So, because to me it's a very geometric metaphor. We can then triangulate on something that is a higher dimensionality than either of us. You know what I mean? When you have two different viewpoints, and you stretch them out, every time you do that, that's the same as in mathematics, adding another vector at a brand new right angle, and you actually get a higher dimensional view of stuff. And I think that's a pretty true metaphor, that this kind of thing can happen. So, on my side, for example, I don't know what kinds of programs might you agree on as an interim, working incrementally towards the society you want. Um, because I think there might be similar things, and then we're on the same path, and who knows, in the future, maybe the paths diverge again. But if we could do that for 100 years, I'm not one to be just, oh, he has wrong ideas about certain things, so it's going to poison the effort. No, I'm rational. I can see if I'm going west or not. If I'm going west, and this guy, he says, I'm going that way, you're going west, he says, no, I'm going towards the god Fubar. I can go ahead and be in a company with somebody like that and have mutual interest. Of course, our paths will diverge in the future. Okay, cheers.